Seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I've got an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 81, printed in House Report number 114-683, offered by Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 820, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this amendment will prevent funds from being used to expand the EPA authority pursuant to Section 115 of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act, which has served us well since 1973, hasn't needed to be expanded, has been used over and over again to make sure that we clean up our act. Section 115 of the Clean Air Act allows the EPA to mandate state emission levels to whatever amount the agency deems appropriate if they find. Listen to that again. The Clean Air Act, Section 115, allows the EPA, the federal government, to mandate our states, all 50 of them, emission levels to whatever amount the agency deems appropriate, whatever amount, if they find two things. Now, this has been there since 1973, but it hasn't been relevant. But it is now. If the EPA finds that U.S. emissions endanger a foreign nation and the endangered nation has a reciprocal agreement to prevent or control emissions in their own nation. Now, where that comes into play is the Paris Climate Agreement. It was just signed. And even though it's not a treaty, because we have the Clean Air Act and Section 115, it is now operative or potentially operative. Many argued that the UN Paris Climate Agreement meets these requirements and once again would allow the federal government to mandate our state emission levels to whatever amount the agency deems appropriate, period. The President has proven time and time again that he has no problem circumventing Congress and working unilaterally to achieve his policy priorities. And I suspect, since he's in favor of the Paris Climate Agreement, that this is one of his policies. With the Clean Power Plan caught up in the courts as the President's administration comes to an end, there is a serious concern and a legitimate concern that he will act unilaterally to cement his environmental legacy by enforcing Section 115 in this way. This amendment would block this attempt to delegate nearly unlimited power and authority over the energy sector in each one of our states to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats at the EPA. Such expansive authority of the EPA would be economically devastating and could threaten the reliability and viability of our nation's energy sector. Now, I know the President's got 5-6 months left to go, and he'd like to get as many regulations on the books as possible. We simply cannot let this happen, and we cannot take it to chance or leave it to chance. And I would urge my colleagues to an affirmative vote on this amendment. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentlelady is recognized.
As has been pointed out, this amendment would block the EPA from regulating air pollution under Section 115 of the Clean Air Act. Section 115 deals with international pollution and allows the United States to work with other countries in transboundary pollution issues. Because, as we know, pollution doesn't stop at a border. It moves, and it's moving around the planet. This amendment is a transparent attempt to stop the Paris Climate Change Agreement reached in December 2015. The Paris Climate Agreement is a milestone in the global effort to combat climate change, something which my constituents feel is very clear, very present, and is a huge problem in which the United States should show leadership in. More than 190 nations have made commitments to limit their climate-damaging pollution, including all the largest developed and developing countries. Future U.S. administrations could use Section 115 to help ensure that the United States does its part and to provide that other countries do their part too. The Perry Amendment would prohibit the EPA and the White House from even developing a well-considered recommendation or whether or not to use this authority. Congress should not take a tool out of the toolbox for a future administration's climate change mitigation toolbox. This is a matter of global leadership. The United States needs to meet its Paris climate commitment, and subsequently, any commitment to act in the future. Congressman Perry's amendment and similar efforts to thwart the progress on climate change could, I would say would, undermine our ability to achieve needed pollution reductions and hit our Paris targets. This amendment is the latest in a long line of Republican attacks on the Clean Air Act and the EPA's authority to respond to the urgent threat of climate change. A vote for this amendment is another vote, in my opinion, for those who deny climate change is real and to block action to curb the carbon pollution that is driving dangerous climate change. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
How much time is remaining, Mr. Speaker?
2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not to deny climate change. This is about authority. And whose authority? The United States and the individual states don't need foreign governments through the federal administration telling them how to run their railroads and their businesses and how much they regulate their own clean air pursuant to the 1973 Clean Air Act. That's why we have the federal government, and that's why it collaborates with the states. Suddenly, because of this agreement between individuals, this is not a treaty ratified by the United States Senate. This is an agreement between individuals that gives the power, potentially gives the power to the federal government to regulate in an unlimited fashion every one of our states. No one in the states signed up for this. No one in the United States Senate voted on this. This is an agreement between individuals, and it should not be let stand in this fashion. This amendment just says that we're going to follow the Clean Air Act passed in 1973 just like we've been. Nothing has changed, because nothing has changed for the states. It's changed between individuals in this administration and people all around the globe that wish to limit the United States' productivity through regulation. That's why this amendment is important, and that's why I hope members will support it, and I reserve the balance.